The Barn. Introducing, in ungodly order, Hallowed Jack, the Watcher of the Pumpkin Patch. CANDYCORN Scarecrow, the Protector of the Harvest. And the Boogeyman, the Guardian of the Barn.
We are talking about the 80s throwback movie, The Barn. This one directed and written by Justin M. Seaman. Yes, make all the jokes you want of that one. So this is a kind of a loving homage to the kind of the monster movies that we came out in the 80s. And I would say especially worth mentioning here is the film Neon Maniacs, which I feel this almost feels like a kind of a spiritual successor to that film, and it kind of actually works in a similar way. So the story focuses on this group of young teenagers and what have you, and they're in this kind of like small town USA, and there's this kind of local legend about this barn where kind of creatures emanated from kind of years before, etc. And there's a bit more kind of context about what they do and stuff like that. And anyway, this bunch of kids ultimately end up at this barn and unwittingly summon these kind of three demonic entities, and they're all kind of, these three creatures are all kind of Halloween themed. We've kind of got like a zombie miner, we've got like a jack-o'-lantern type kind of guy with a pumpkin head, and a kind of a scarecrow. And they are kind of like terrorising the town, etc., taking up victims in lots of kind of like practical effects, gooey goodness. And that's kind of your movie here. So, you know, what do we think? It's actually, I was looking forward to this one for a while. I'd seen it come out a little while ago, and you know, it's obviously kind of now getting a bit more of a wider release. So I was kind of very happy to see it, and I have to say this definitely does have it really does the 80s kind of throwback thing pretty well. I feel maybe some of the characters, the hair could have been a little bit done better to make it really look like 80s. They just kind of seem like they've got some random clothes, but they don't really look at much 80s other than that, I've got to say. But nonetheless, I feel that it does capture the films in the way that they were shot back then, and the kind of the more sort of simplistic kind of stories that we have there, which by today's standards might frustrate new viewers who aren't maybe that fond of 80s throwback movies, because I feel the style of storytelling in this is very kind of like your just run-of-the-mill kind of like monster slasher movies that you got in the 80s, and maybe don't have more of the kind of the sophistication that some more modern films do. So the main weakness with this film is awful acting. This film has absolutely awful acting by the majority of its cast. Added to that, there is some really over-the-top ADR. So if you don't know what ADR is, it's basically people re-record dialogue in a kind of studio because the mic hasn't picked it up particularly well when they're shooting it. And there is some just horribly obvious like voiceovers here where people have clearly re-recorded their lines, but they seem so obvious and so kind of like, you know, distinct from any kind of like ambient effects, or sometimes when other people are talking, it's really obvious. So that, unfortunately, coupled with some terrible acting, makes this film a little bit hard to get into because of that. Because you simply aren't buying into any of these characters. They just seem like, you know, not real people, ultimately. And I've got to say, I didn't like the way our main kind of hero character, if you like, our main protagonist, I didn't particularly like the way he was written. It's a little bit too on the nose. I actually kind of quite liked his kind of best friend. I thought he actually seemed like the kind of the most real character. But the way the character's written, most characters are written, the way they acted, and the kind of the ADR makes it for quite a tough experience. You know, when we kind of are dealing with our human sort of characters. When we get onto the monster things, they kind of work a little bit better. They are kind of a good throwback to like the monsters of the 80s, where they don't seem quite particularly scary. And I'll compare this to Neon Maniacs again, because when you watch that, you do feel like these things are genuinely threatening. Whilst with this movie, you don't. They just seem a little bit too cartoonish to me. They kind of look quite cool. There are some kind of like some really fun visual splatter effects, and there's kind of lots of kind of like gooey deaths and people getting impaled on stuff, and lots of gory goodness for you here. And the monster effects are really, you know, they're quite fun. I like the design. I like the kind of the guy, the pumpkin head, who's got the kind of like the fiery eyes. I thought, you know, him in particular was a really kind of like well-designed creature and visually striking. So I thought that was very, very good. The Scarecrow less so much, and the Miner looks cool, but maybe a little bit generic. So, you know, but overall it's quite fun. And I've got to say, it kind of, the climax is quite fun when we kind of end up in this kind of like this barn, and we see a variety of other kind of like things in there, and there's a little bit of a twist as well. So I thought that, you know, it ended up on a little bit more of a kind of a positive note. So overall, I think if you are a fan of 80s kind of like style movies, you know, it makes it quite, it's an enjoyable throwback. I mean, it's got lots of kind of 80s style music. It's obviously a low budget production, so they've not had the money to get the music licenses, which I feel is a shame, because I felt that would have really benefited from this movie if it had some kind of like more recognisable 80s tracks. But the kind of obviously the royalty-free music that they've kind of got, which is 80s style, is okay. It's pretty good. So that was all quite fun. So I would give this movie a 6 out of 10. I would say it's worth a watch, but I don't think it's as classic or as a good enough attempt as other 80s throwbacks movies that we've had, things like Turbo Kid, for example. I don't think it is quite as good a movie as those ones there. So a 6 out of 10. Have you seen it? What did you think of it? Leave me a comment, and I shall look forward to seeing you next time. Bye for now.